Hello and welcome to Lean RPA Principles and Practice, Chapter 5, Getting Started by Rob King. In previous chapters, we've looked at why we believe there's a need for combining Lean and RPA together. We've looked at the history, and we've looked at the different types of automation available, and started to think about some of the different frameworks that can help you in your RPA rollout, such as runners, repeaters, and rogues as a way of classifying different types of processes. We've also discussed the impact on people and how you can start to address that right from the early stages of your program. And now we're going to move into the next chapter, which is what you need to do to get started. Chapter 5 is going to be one of our longer chapters. Here we're going to look at some of the initial Lean principles: customer, people, process. We're going to start thinking about strategy and the roadmap for setting out your game plan for Lean RPA. We're going to talk specifically about how you select your automation technology and how you distinguish between the different vendors. And finally, we're going to look at the skills and critical success factors needed for a successful RPA implementation. Successful RPA and automation projects typically have one thing in common, and that is that they complement traditional solutions or processes. They successfully evolve or integrate with existing processes, whether that's at the desktop as an attended automation or whether that's in the background as an unattended automation. In effect, you achieve a good compromise, the best of both worlds. Whenever I first introduce lean thinking to someone, this is typically the place I begin. Starting with customer, people, and process. Now, all three of these factors are equally important in Lean, so it doesn't matter the order I cover them. I'll start with the customer. From a customer perspective, what is value? Lean thinking is a very customer-centric approach. And our goal is always to understand what are the value-adding steps from a customer point of view. When collaborating with a team internally, that will often be the question you ask. Put yourself into the customer's shoes and ask yourself, does the customer think this adds value? If you're not sure, then actually it'll always be a case of going and talking directly to the customer and interacting as best you can to get that feedback in real time. The second factor is people. And we've talked about this as being the heart of the Toyota house. This means an empowered workforce who take ownership and accountability for what needs to be done. And this means giving them the right skills to do the job and also the right skills to be able to solve problems. And finally, it's about process. And when we talk about process, it's about efficiency, zero waste. And that's a process that's capable, i.e. it delivers what is needed when it is needed, but also flexible, so it's easy to change when change comes. These three factors underpin all of lean thinking. And they're equally applicable when we start looking at our RPA program. We don't want to simply automate exactly what we have, because we may not be implementing what the customer actually perceives as value, or we might not be implementing the most efficient process that we can. And when it comes to the method of implementation, these are our people. Our people should be empowered to be able to deliver things in an iterative, rapid, and efficient way, giving them the right skills to be able to do the job. And we'll look in more detail at skills later in this chapter. So, your first mantra to remember: whenever thinking about lean, think about the customer, think about people, and think about the process. One of the greatest challenges that you're going to face when starting out on your Lean RPA program is going to be the challenge of culture. And that culture is going to be defined by the operating model that's in place at the starting point within your organization. So here I'm just contrasting two extreme models, and you're in all likelihood going to be somewhere between the two. Legacy operating models traditionally fit on the waterfall process, a very well structured development methodology that doesn't move from one step to another until the prior step has been completed, hence the term waterfall. Organizationally, you will find many silos or vertical integration. You will also find an empowered organization and a very command and control organization. You'll find processes that are dependent upon people. And you're going to have a background where typical new product introduction takes a long time, typically over multiple years. And IT or IT costs are seen as a cost center. Now, each organization may have some or less of those things to a smaller or greater degree. But the more of them that you have, the greater challenge of culture that you're going to face, typically when starting to implement a digital operating model such as RPA. RPA, of course, is responsive or agile. Rather than working in silos, it works in what's called ecosystems, which is collaboration across the whole organization. Rather than command and control, you see empowerment and the opportunity for big ideas. Instead of processes being driven by people, processes are driven by data, and you have more control, interestingly. And rather than having multiple year product cycles, you have a program of continuous innovation. Organizations like Amazon are making changes continually throughout the day. And IT is seen as part of the strategy, as a growth driver, rather than purely as a cost. So, the closer you are to the right-hand side list, compared to the left-hand side of this list, is likely that the simpler task you're going to have in terms of changing the culture. And that doesn't mean that all of these problems on the left will actually unhinge or cause you major problems, but in the long term, digital operating models work in a much more agile and responsive way. Here is our first exercise. So in a minute, you're going to be asked to pause the video and think about this. So thinking about those categories we talked about on the previous slide, the operating model factors, I want you to scale each one on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is completely legacy and 10 is completely digital. And for each score that you provide that's between 1 and 6, you need to indicate what are the challenges that you'll face and what do you need to put in place to mitigate that. For scores above 6, this is positive. How can you reinforce this thinking and increase the score further? The more items that you have scored 1 to 6, the more challenging the environment for an RPA implementation. Okay, over to you. Pause now. Welcome back. So, moving on. This is our automation delivery lifecycle. It's giving you all the broad steps that you're going to go through from initial inception, finally through to a complete center of excellence, maintaining and improving your robots. So, what are the steps that you're going to complete? Well, they fall into 3 broad phases. The first phase is insight, understanding where you are and your vision for the future. Your second phase is getting started. This is taking you through the initial training and your initial pilot as you start to learn about RPA and what it can do for you. Finally, your third phase is building your Centre of Excellence. This is where you scale and you sustain your RPA program. In other words, this is your maturity model. At the start, you're going to take baby steps to gain insight. As you develop more insight, you'll be able to try out the tools, use the tools, and try them on your own processes. And eventually, you'll learn your successful lessons to drive a bigger implementation across the whole organization. We've already looked at some of the tools that you can use in different phases throughout the life cycle. So, for example, the different types of automation that we discussed in one of the earlier chapters is in your early exploratory and raising awareness phase. Also, the learn, deliver, showcase model is something that you can use as you start to demonstrate what is possible with automation. The runners, repeaters and rogues model is something that will help you to select your first process, and then later on in your Centre of Excellence will be a core component of selecting the next process. And finally, the Toyota model, the lean thinking, the Toyota house. This again will be used to optimize and make your processes efficient before you jump into the development phase and start to develop them. So we've already started to see some of the tools and techniques as they fit into this life cycle. Over the next few chapters, we're going to regularly revisit this slide as we look at tools to see where they fit. But for now, I'm going to go do a quick run through of the main stages as you typically go through an automation program. Your first step will often be to agree the scope. Why is this program starting? Who's the sponsor? What is the main goal? An exploratory workshop is something we use to help businesses gain an understanding of the art of the possible, what RPA can do for them, and what other organisations' lessons learned they can take away to help choose where is a good place to start for them. Raising awareness means expelling myths. It means creating that common vocabulary we've talked about before, and it means understanding what your business needs are to start to align them to different technologies, something we're going to look at in more detail in this chapter. The next step will be building up the skills you need for a pilot team. There are 6 key skills that are important for an automation delivery, and we'll look at what those 6 skills are again as part of this chapter. Having selected a process, the next step is to optimize it. And that means using the lean tools to actually drive out an efficient process. And we'll look at some of those lean tools again in a future chapter. Having defined your first process, the next step is to develop the automation. And this is where we harken back to some of those frameworks we looked at previously. We prefer to use the PDCA or the Lean Startup method for driving out iterative changes to your model, learning from real customers the impact of the change. But that doesn't fit every organisation, and there are a wealth of different other methodologies that can also be applied at this stage that works better for your organisation. Remember, back to that slide just a couple of slides ago, where we talked about legacy models versus digital models. Depending on where you are as an organisation, the best fit for you is going to be one that works for your organisation. But of course, you're going to be driving more to the digital model than the legacy model. You may actually pilot more than one process. Anywhere between 1 to 5 processes may be run as part of your pilot. But at the end of the pilot, you will review and start to take the lessons learned. What are the things that worked for you as an organisation, both in terms of the choice of technology and in terms of the processes selected, and in terms of the impact that was achieved. Here you can now take the pilot and refine your long-term strategy based on real lessons that work for your organization. We now move out of the pilot phase and into the long-term sustainability phase. So one of the first steps that you're going to put in place is a method to prioritize continuously the backlog of processes so that you can simply pick off the next process in a priority order in an efficient manner. Here's where we've seen organizations try to boil the ocean and actually document every process possible before starting on their automation journey. And we're looking here at a method called the process funnel as a way to rapidly identify which is the next process that you need to automate. There is a challenge of scale. Many organizations who struggle with RPA often have successful pilots, but then come somewhat unstuck. That problem typically is one of scale, or finding the operating model that now will let you to grow and sustain your organization and your automation program. Having defined your operating model, the next step is to operationalize that model, and we've got an entire chapter on that very topic later on. Finally, you're into sustain mode. How can you continue to improve? How can you continue to learn? And how can you continue to maintain the automations in place? One of the risks that is often identified for automation is the risk of loss of knowledge. As processes are automated and people leave or move on to new roles, then the information about how the process worked is lost. The solution to that problem is actually really simple. It is to apply a lean process to it, because lean will provide an appropriate level of documentation for every process before it is automated. It will create an efficient process. So if you're in an industry that changes regularly and therefore flexibility is a key component, then you will have all of the information that you are going to need to be able to quickly adapt and refine those existing automations. We're going to revisit the automation delivery lifecycle regularly throughout the remainder of this course. But for now, we're going to stay in the insight phase and talk a little bit more about another tool that you can use to help raise awareness and drive forward a strategy for automation. This is our lean RPA game plan. It's our vision for what we see as the bold steps that we're going to go through as we complete the entire program. It's not a detailed roadmap of step-by-step instructions and tasks that we're going to complete, but rather the moves that we're going to go through as we deliver the overall RPA program. And here's just a sample. This is one that we've developed for another organization. Yours will probably be a variation on this. This is a good starter for 10. And the first step in that is raising awareness. We saw that in the previous chapter, understanding what is robotic process automation, categorizing it, creating a vision for people and process and organization, and setting off a kickoff message was something that we've covered already. And then we'll move into identifying initial opportunities, prioritizing and understanding which is the next process for us to look at, the operating model, how do we need to organize ourselves for success, what is the development components that we need to consider, and of course this will be iterative, and then finally, how do we sustain that model in the long term. I'm going to start breaking some of this down. So here we'll start to look at process documentation and starting to optimize those processes using lean tools. We'll start to understand the different types of automation available. Some processes for example, may fit desktop very well. Others may fit a chatbot or other technology. We'll start to consider how do we develop the return on investment. So what are the benefits? One of the key components, particularly in the early stages, is going to be demonstrating that return on investment. And we need to start thinking about people. Who are the people who can start to champion the cause for RPA within the organization and start to create that viral communication across the different people to get involved within the program overall? Prioritization is actually a simpler task than it first seems, because quite often at the start of your process, identifying the highest volume and most time-consuming tasks pretty much narrow you down to a few processes to trial as part of your pilot. But actually over time, you've got to check all processes. So you need a funnel to identify and prioritize which are the most important to be assessing next. It also gives you an opportunity to identify and catalogue common processes, because there will be opportunities for reuse later on. The next part of your game plan is understanding the operating model. And this means understanding the technology choice. How does the technology fit with your existing systems? And how should it be configured? How do you start to empower people to be able to drive that change forward? And what does your new organizational responsibilities and organizational structure start to look like under RPA? One of the questions that comes up from time to time is whether RPA processes should fit within IT or within the business. But the way I always look at this is that they are business processes and you've got to treat them like business people. And they do not really fit into the category of software. New operating models need to be defined to allow you to scale and also to sustain the program. And that integration with the existing technology landscape is probably one of the more complex areas, and you've got to be able to have a close working relationship between technical experts and business experts to fully develop a functional operating model. The next part of your game plan, not surprisingly, is development. And that development also means optimizing for robotic process automation. Processes can be different when they're run by people compared to when run by robots, because now you can run them and scale them at different times of the day, whereas people you may be limited to certain times of the day. But of course some traditional skills are still crucial here. Development and testing and standardization of the build is really important. And you're going to start to be introducing a new set of services, a new set of functions that comes along with robotic automation. So that new service introduction needs to be a component of the development cycle. And of course, in good agile thinking, a retrospective, constantly challenging and understanding what can we do better in an iterative manner really works well within this tool set. Finally, we have maintain and improve. This is the ongoing monitoring and running actually potentially 24/7. And that brings in operational challenges and performance monitoring and actually responsibilities for deployment. So the chance now is for continuous improvement. How can we start to improve our own newly defined operating model? And that's where lean thinking comes in again. So our game plan helps us communicate to stakeholders and people involved what are the stages and steps we're going to need to go through and consider as we move forward. And they are technical steps and operational steps. So this is a combined game plan that covers both technical and business requirements. Sitting down in a workshop or individually with all of your key stakeholders to start to build and define your game plan is going to be one of the very first steps that you need to consider when starting to put together your roadmap for RPA. A final few things to think about when we're developing the game plan. Typically, when you're looking at processes, you're going to identify the highest impact areas, time and cost being the key elements there. But also, depending on your industry, personalization could be a key component. Remember, from a lean perspective, we always go back to what is adding value to the customer. And it could be that you identify processes where we are increasing the customer experience that become the priority areas. It's also not just about automating existing processes. RPA tools give you the opportunity to develop new and innovative new opportunities that were previously perhaps not possible because of the manpower necessary. It also gives you the opportunity to respond to industry and customer attitude changes. Modern day customers have different needs in terms of seeing things online and in real time. And these tools give you the opportunity to address some of those challenges. And also, a final consideration is understanding that you choose a technology and implement it in a way that is scalable to increased volume, but flexible to be able to be retrained, particularly in an industry that's regulated, where you see regulatory changes impacting processes significantly. This last factor is perhaps one that is particularly important when starting to move into the area of machine learning. But for process or robotic process automation, which tend to be very task-based, it's the documentation and simplicity of those processes that make them flexible and easy to change. Our next topic is selecting your automation vendor. Now, on the surface, many of these RPA vendors look very similar. But as an independent consultant, one of the things that we see is there are a lot of differences behind the scenes. And so there are a lot of factors to choose between when selecting your automation vendor. And we look at this from the perspective of an inside view and an outside view. The inside view are all of the factors about your specific organization that are important in narrowing down your choice of vendors. If you imagine for a moment there are 30 vendors out there, then many of them are not going to fit your specific business needs. And we're going to look at some of these in detail over the next few slides. Having narrowed it down to a few vendors, there are then some specific outside views that you can start to go and glean about those organizations, again, to try and decide how well it fits for you as an organization. So let's start with the inside view. What are the factors about your specific organization that are important before you choose your vendor? Or at least were you using these factors to narrow down the vendors to a vital few? The first factor to consider when choosing an automation vendor is your own company outlook. You've got to ask yourself the question of what is your motivation for running an automation project? Is it tactical or strategic? Are you looking for an enterprise level solution or something to run locally? And is it back office facing or is it customer facing? Now these factors alone will narrow down the automation vendors that are available out there that are fit for your organization. So for example, you might look at some tactical solutions that are very easy to use and non-technical. Or you might look at customer-facing solutions that are going to need integration with machine learning and chatbots in the future. These are important factors to consider here up front before you choose the vendor. Your budget is the second factor to consider. How much are you looking to spend? There are a wide range of costs between different providers, and now those costs are based on the different types of services and different technologies that they use to deliver their service. The payback period, or total cost of ownership, can be really important. Some of the vendors provide services that seem very cheap but are expensive to scale. If you're only ever going to run at a small local level, back to your Outlook for example, then actually some of the cheaper options probably work well. But if you know that you're going to operate at scale and you know that you're going to scale up, then actually some of those different licensing models that you see could become much more expensive when you reach that phase. So having an idea up front can really help you narrow down to the right vendor. We've covered the different types of automation already, but they're an important factor here when selecting a vendor, because if you know that you're going to need only desktop or chatbot, then that's going to narrow down the vendors that only provide those two services. So thinking about the types of automation that you're going to do or need is important. Orchestration is another factor. How are you going to manage work between your human workforce and your robot workforce? Some organizations already have strong business process management solutions, and if that's the case, you're probably looking for solutions that integrate well with your BPM solution. Conversely, some of the solutions provide excellent orchestration within the RPA tool, so therefore providing you with that level of orchestration. So what is going to be your method of orchestration for work? In the long term, of course, more and more work will be handled by the bots. And that's another consideration when you think about orchestration. Orchestration is also important depending on your hours of operation. If you're operating 24/7, you have a different set of needs, perhaps to an organization that runs shift patterns or just a 9 to 5. Technical fit, sometimes called a proof of technology, is also really important. Making sure that the tools that you're selecting are compatible with the technology that you're going to be using. It sort of goes without saying, but it's an easy thing to check very early on. The other one that's a bit tougher though is the business fit or skills. Different organizations have different levels of IT or technical competence. Organizations which have weak IT competence are going to look for a solution that is going to be more at the model driven or business technology end of the spectrum. But if it's an organization that's highly technical and has a lot of those skills, then in all likelihood it opens up the doorway to some of the tools that sit perhaps at the more technical end. And this comes back to one of the earlier questions of enterprise or local. Many of the enterprise solutions provide you with a lot of reuse or reusability, the ability to create things in modules, of which some of the smaller technologies don't. And if you don't have the level of experience, you're not going to need some of those services. So it helps you to narrow down to a vital few RPA vendors that are going to be suitable for your business. So you've looked at a number of internal factors about your own organization, and those internal factors have narrowed down your choice of vendors. And we're going to talk about the different vendors in just a moment. Having narrowed down the vendors, there are then some more detailed type questions that you might want to ask of those vendors that will then help you to narrow further. And this is our outside view, the factors that you perhaps wouldn't want to do for everybody, But once you're starting to narrow it down, they're important next level of information that's going to be important in selecting the correct vendor for you specifically. And the first one of those links quite closely to cost, the total cost of ownership. We've mentioned this one already. And again, because of the complexity of the different licensing models, here's where actually drilling into the exact details of scaling will help you to compare from one vendor to another. Training and resource availability is an important factor. The level of availability for your own recruitment, for example, is really important. Also, are you going to do the development internally, or are you going to recruit externally? And what is the level of advanced training that's available? Now, online training, third-party organizations, and even the vendors themselves are increasingly providing training resources. But it's the resource availability now that is going to vary significantly from country to country. And you've got to understand for your own segment and for your own skills and for your own location, what is the level of availability? And this is where partner and vendor support will sort of come in. So some vendors provide support directly, but I think all vendors probably provide support also through partners. Partners gives them a reach beyond what's their own capability. So many partners also work with several different vendors, providing you with the opportunity of a neutral product selection. So if we come back to our inside focus, then actually it helps you to look at your own business to find the products that are going to fit best for you. A partner will also help you through the piloting phase in particular, as you select your process, define your first process, and monitor your first process. But then after the pilot, what is the level of ongoing vendor support that's available in your specific location? All of these things can be important factors when deciding which is the right vendor for you. Next, we have the vertical fit, or the industry in which you work. Some vendors and partners work very closely with certain industries. And if this is important to you, then actually being able to sort of talk to them in your own language can be very important. It also gives you the opportunity to find case studies and maybe even site visits to organizations within your industry sector that have implemented that solution. And that will give you additional confidence in terms of whether it's fit for purpose. Finally, we'll talk about reuse and controls. And this again comes back to whether you're looking to really scale your expectations, and particularly if you're going to get into multi-team development, where you could have multiple teams working on different components of an automation solution. Different products have different capabilities in terms of the ability to support multi-team development and the version control that goes alongside that. So if you have large scale expectations, you're going to limit the number of choices available to you. Governance is also an important factor in your long-term sustainability. This is the ability to have the appropriate levels of security control in terms of who can do what, and also the appropriate levels of audit and understanding in terms of what has happened. And again, some companies use third parties to actually provide some of these services, which come either at an extra cost or are just included within the package. Your specific needs are going to be driven by your type of business, and then you've got to understand which tools fit that the closest. So in other words, selecting your automation vendor is less about the vendor themselves and more about your own wants and needs as an organization. And understanding those wants and needs will allow you to filter down the big list of 30 plus vendors down to a vital few that you can then actually apply the outside view and drill more deeply to understand what is the level of support, what is the level of fit with your own organization before making your final selection. And if we apply this thinking back to our automation delivery lifecycle for a moment, this is going to be one of the very first tasks that you're going to do before you can even start to move into beginning a pilot. In this next phase, we're going to start to look at some of the vendors. Now, there are many reports out there on the different vendors and what they can do, and case studies, and I do recommend you starting to have a look at some of them. Each of these reports classify the vendors in different ways, and I'm going to use the 4 categories we have here. Market leaders are the current market leaders in general robotic process automation, and they work across multiple industries. Enterprise ready are market-leading credentials outside of the RPA space, but have now incorporated robotic automation into their offering. Our contenders are solid robotic process automation offering, but are still building their markets to share, and contenders are still very strong. And then we have targeted, more focused solutions, perhaps more niche, looking at specific industries or specific sectors. It will come no surprise to anyone, I'm sure, that the 3 market leaders in the automation space right now are Blue Prism, UiPath, and Automation Anywhere. However, even between these 3 choices, there are many differences in terms of what they offer. Blue Prism is solidly in the RPA space, for example, whereas UiPath and Automation Anywhere predominantly sit in the desktop, but provide the orchestration available to be able to be unattended. Enterprise-ready solutions like Pegasystems or NICE are strong solutions in their own right and have recently, or not so recently, added automation into their offering. I've just listed a few of the contenders, and there are actually many more. There are over 30 currently listed. And finally, we have targeted solutions. And I've mentioned these 3 targeted solutions because they all offer something quite unique. IPsoft, AutoLogic, and SPS. So these are our 3 market leaders: Blue Prism, UiPath, and Automation Anywhere. Blue Prism is an innovator that first saw RPA as distinct from BPM. A group of process automation experts formed Blue Prism in 2001. Secure, scalable, and central management of a virtual workforce of robots in regulated industries is the company's focus. Its go-to-market approach is indirect. It has a strong partner focus. With over 80% of revenue coming directly from license fees. Blue Prism offers an end-to-end process view that results in work distribution, orchestration, and queue management strength. Central control of all RPA functions is well suited to a regulated industry focus. The solution has strong load balancing, restart functionality, encryption at rest, and audit, as well as desktop-aligned robots that are defined and managed centrally. Compared to many software providers, Blue Prism has a strong moral center. It is clear on what the product will do and is religious about what it will not. Organizations that are looking for unattended use cases will always shortlist Blue Prism. In recent times, Blue Prism has had a partnership with Appian to address some of the BPM functionality. UiPath provides an open platform well suited to complex automation. Founded in 2005 in Romania, UiPath started out developing software development kits. Today, its software products eradicate tedious, redundant tasks with robots. The vendor does not do direct implementations, rather its success is based on an appeal to integrators, partners, and savvy end users who like to extend robotic process automation by using scripting and programming environments. UiPath's open approach is well received. The design studio is based on Microsoft's Workflow Foundation. Robots run on the desktop but do not require a separate virtual machine. Servers handle management and control tasks when needed. UiPath also provide a free training academy and now an advanced free training academy. UiPath provide a good option as a low cost for small businesses and startups. Automation Anywhere was reported as the market leader in 2017 and delivers enterprise-grade digital workforce platform. Automation Anywhere's primary targets are shared services like procure-to-pay and quote-to-cash, human resource administrations and claims processing. Automation Anywhere's work is 90% back office and 10% front office. AA is also the largest revenue of all the RPA providers and has strong market momentum. Automation Anywhere sits perhaps at the more technical side with programming skills needed to develop the robots. NICE is a $1 billion plus organisation. It got into the RPA market in 2010 with the acquisition of Igloo. NICE provides an attended and unattended solution and also is well used in many call centres and back office functions. Arguably, NICE have a 15-year track record of automation, making them perhaps one of the longest standing RPA providers. While NICE has predominantly sold into its existing customer base, it has recently set up a separate RPA function to promote the fact that it has an RPA offering. The modelling approach, interestingly, fits quite well with some of the lean value maps we'll look at later on. Pegasystems, meanwhile, is a huge and very well-known BPM solution. It acquired OpenSpan in 2016. The integration between Pega and OpenSpan allows orchestration now to occur between both robots and humans. Both Pegasystems and NICE provide solutions that include chatbot and also some machine learning capabilities. Moving on to the contenders, there are many companies in this list. Companies like WorkFusion, Redwood, Thoughtonomy, Cryon, Edgeverve, Contexator, Softomotive and CA all provide automation solutions. What varies most significantly is probably their presence in different countries. Some of these, for example, have very limited, if any, capabilities within the UK, whereas from Gartner reports and Forrester, we see that they're very strong in the USA. And we've experienced the same situation when looking at organisations across Europe. One of the greatest limiting factors to these organisations tends to be whether there is a significant enough presence within your specific country. A few specific mentions though. Many organisations use the simple Softomotive Win automation software on the desktop, as well as perhaps a more comprehensive solution for RPA. WorkFusion has a strong machine learning offering integrated into its main product line. And Thoughtonomy uses Blue Prism as the underlying RPA engine, but provides a service in the cloud. Each of these different products have their own strengths that separate them from perhaps the market leaders, but also make them significant consideration whenever looking at your own specific needs. There are also solutions out there that we'll call targeted because they focus on specific areas. IPsoft, for example, focus on the chatbot area. SPS or Swiss Post have grown out of the OCR and actually have a strong link to actually getting data through the OCR method. And AutoLogix provides a central engine for both machine learning and automation. Each of these products is priced differently depending on your specific needs. To sum up the topic of selecting your automation technology overall, I'm going to fall back on one of the lean principles. One of the things that Toyota found in the early days was strong partnerships with third parties helped them to accelerate their journey more quickly. And the same is definitely true when it comes to automation. Partnering with someone who can help you select the correct automation technology and is broadly technology agnostic will help you to accelerate and select the right product that's suitable for your organization. I can't help but feel I've been talking for quite a long time in this chapter, so I'm going to hand over to you for an exercise. So we've looked at all the internal, inside and outside factors that you would consider when evaluating vendors. Which of these factors do you think are most important for you? And what additional factors would you add in the evaluation of vendors? Can you rank those factors in order of priority and start to accept or reject potential vendors based on what you know so far? Okay, I'm going to pause. And welcome back. How did you get on? We'd love to hear from you at the RPA Academy social site. So please post on the forum and we'd love to sort of join in your discussion. Our next topic in this chapter is the topic of skills. What we've tended to see is there's been an acute focus on the specific technical skills, and many organisations and training organisations have already started to focus to address this. But our contention is that it's not just about the technical skills. For the success of an RPA program, there is a wider range of skills that are needed. In fact, we've highlighted 6 skills that you need to implement or need to consider when implementing an RPA program. So, in building the skills needed, here are the first 3. The first, your leader, evangelist, advocate, and in control of governance. The first role provides leadership for a centre of excellence, providing the strategy and the vision for robotic process automation, evangelizing the importance at senior levels to ensure buy-in and support, raising awareness and celebrating success and showcasing the impact. Establishing and chairing the steering group to drive engagement and direction at executive level while taking accountability to ensure that appropriate standards are established and maintained. The second is process improvement or lean thinking, problem solving and continuous improvement. Optimization of processes ready for automation is a crucial first step in development of an automation process. Providing the initial assessment to establish priority and impact while also understanding that efficient automated processes are different to efficient people-oriented operated processes. A clear set of criteria should be established to quickly identify the opportunity areas for automation. Automation is not just about automating the tasks carried out by the people today, but also identifying the opportunities that were simply not possible to complete by people. The disruptive end of automation is still untapped by the market today. The third skill then is around the operating model or business architecture or organizational design. Implementing robotic process automation is a paradigm shift requiring business transformation thinking and not simple evolutionary thinking. Areas of accountability will change significantly, requiring a respective designed and well-considered change to the operating model. Challenge organizational thinking for new robotic operating models also requires change management techniques to ensure that changes are embedded and benefits released. Our fourth skill is that of architecture, maintaining the technology stack and building the solution design and enterprise architecture. The first benefit that can be achieved by a centre of excellence is in establishing agreed technologies that fit the business need, avoiding the risk of a proliferation of technology. Obtaining technical skills is one of the greatest challenges, so taking time to evaluate and select the correct technology is an essential first step. Providing technology guidance, choice, configuration, maintenance, and solution design are all key components of this skill set. Inevitably, as automation increases, there is also an increase in the level of complexity needed to integrate with other applications. Understanding of the wider technology stack to facilitate efficient reuse and integration will become an increasingly important skill set within this role. Development, testing, collaboration, and agile working. Development of robotic automations for existing processes generally fits within business functions. However, complex automations and testing of new concepts would typically sit within a COE. Thus, providing training expertise and availability of shared development resources in establishing the first generation of operations. Automation development, testing, deployment, and version control all sit within this role. Operations, maintenance, support. Maintenance of existing robotic automations requires 24/7 operations. This consideration particularly around exception handling and performance monitoring. The ongoing maintenance of existing robotic automations, monitoring, retraining, and optimization of robots across the portfolio becomes a new role within the organization. A recent LinkedIn article listed over 100 roles in robotic process automation. Even accounting for a little bit of creative synonyms, that was still a lot of roles. My first involvement was desktop automation back in 2013, and since then have been involved in several other technologies as part of an innovation team. The early years of automation could be described as our pioneering phase, where we gained greater understanding of the technologies and the approach, learning what it does and doesn't work for. And the next step was to begin thinking about longer-term strategy. But two key lessons we learned during the pioneering phase was, first of all, regardless of your starting point, the full benefits of RPA can typically only be achieved through a hybrid approach using a centre of excellence. And secondly, a collaboration between IT and business is critical to success. So while we have seen literally hundreds of roles defined for RPA, we believe at your starting point, these are the 6 key roles you need to establish a COE. Now, sometimes, particularly during the pilot phase, you might not have a single person in each of these roles, but a single person may cover multiple components of these roles. But that is challenging, and that type of challenge is also what leads to a shortage of resources. So thinking about who is going to fulfill each of these roles, whatever phase of the project you're in, is an important step as you build up towards your first pilot. We'll be revisiting these skills again in Chapter 7 when we start looking at the Centre of Excellence. Our final topic for this chapter is critical success factors. Critical success factor is a management term for an element that is necessary for an organisation or a project to achieve its stated goal. And so for automation, there are a number of factors which have generally been agreed are critical to the success of your program. And I'll start with executive support. That top-down executive support is crucial. This is going to be a challenging time using a challenging technology with many people challenges. And so that top-down support is going to be crucial. A target operating model, not essential for your pilot phase, but certainly essential once you begin to scale. And similarly, a strategy for change. When we talk about collaboration and modern ways of working, we don't mean governance less or anarchy. There still needs to be a clear responsibility for governance and change. There needs to be a certain amount of personal drive. Finding an executive who's a little bit evangelical will actually help to motivate others and drive the program forward. Certainly during the early pioneering phases when you're still learning a lot yourself as an organization. End user education and training for everybody on the program is going to be critical, and the ability to work and collaboratively. Also, we've touched on this already, but back to the lean components, that detailed process understanding, well documented, is important. Also, the ability to manage exceptions and quality control, because they're going to happen, and back to runners, repeaters and rogues. There is a process which says if you can't do it through the automation, through the runner process, then there needs to be a process to trigger a rogue, whereby somebody with the technical expertise can control it. There needs to be clear risk and governance sign-off within your organization and robust end user testing. And finally, you need to understand what it is you need to measure, because what gets measured gets done, and therefore you need a tracking in place to make sure that you've been successful. Each of your critical success factors will likely have a measure or number of measures that will allow you to track whether you're being successful in achieving your stated goals. In defining each of the critical success factors, it's also important to understand exactly what the definition is and what is it that you're going to measure to ensure that you're achieving that factor. I'm now going to hand back to you for a short exercise. I want you to list 5 to 8 critical success factors, ensuring that you're going to mix some tangible, easy to measure, and intangible factors. Evaluate each critical success factor, whether it or not it is necessary to ensure the success, and reject if that test fails. What are the must-dos and must-haves for each critical success factor to be successful? Is it a key measurement met or a critical person support, etc.? So, over to you. Welcome back. How did you get on with that exercise? As always, please share your thoughts on the social forum at the rpaacademy.com. We've covered a lot of material, and this is our longest chapter by far. So I'm going to take a pause, let you relax, and just do a quick recap of what we've learned so far in our foundations and getting started with Lean and RPA. This is our application development lifecycle, which we first visited at the beginning of this chapter. We've now added some additional tools, which I'm going to put onto this timeline. The first one is our vendor selection process. This isn't just the vendors themselves, but also the inside and outside criteria that you need to use to evaluate which is the right vendor for you. We've also got the 6 key skills essential to any automation project, and how you're going to fulfill them, even initially for your pilot. And then the first of our lean principles, customer, people, and process. This chapter, we've ticked off 2 really important goals. Who are the automation providers, and how do you select the right one for you? And the 6 key skills needed for a successful RPA implementation. And our next chapter, we're going to start looking in more detail at lean thinking. So since chapter 1, we've looked at the background and key concepts of lean. We've looked at the runners, repeaters, and rogues model for customer demand. We've looked at the components of the Toyota house. Remember, today we've done customer, people, and process, and also the respect for people at the center of the Toyota house. We've looked at the game plan, an essential part of that building a stakeholder vision. And we've also looked at some of the skills needed, both lean and technical, for a successful RPA implementation. And then from an automation perspective, we've looked at the history and the current market. We've looked at the different types of automation, and we've looked at a couple of frameworks, particularly ones such as Teach, Deliver, Showcase. We've looked at digital operating models and the difference between perhaps traditional or legacy models. We've looked at automation with a human touch. And we've looked at vendor selection. And then finally, we've looked at the technical skills essential to building a successful lean RPA team. Thank you very much for listening. Please, any comments or feedback, email me directly, details will be on the next screen, or comment on the forum at the RPA Academy. Thank you again.